the Viking who became a Byzantine general, Harald Hardrada's incredible journey. Picture this. A 15-year-old Viking prince stands on a blood-soaked battlefield in Norway, watching his half-brother, a king, die before his eyes. Wounded and defeated, he flees into the frozen wilderness with nothing but his life and burning ambition. 30 years later, that same boy would become one of the wealthiest and most feared warriors in medieval Europe, commanding elite Byzantine troops, battling pirates in the Mediterranean, and accumulating treasure that would become the stuff of legend. This is not fiction. This is the story of Harald Hardrada, hard ruler. And his journey is so extraordinary that even the Viking sagas, known for their exaggeration, struggle to capture its full magnitude. The boy who lost everything. The year was 1030, and young Harald Sigurdsson had just experienced his baptism by fire at the Battle of Stiklestad. His half-brother, King Olaf II of Norway, lay dead, and the dream of a unified Christian Norway died with him. Harald, barely old enough to grow a beard, had two choices: submit to his enemies or disappear entirely. He chose a third option, one that would change his life forever. He fled east, crossing into the vast wilderness of Kievan Rus, where Viking descendants had carved out powerful kingdoms. But here's where the story takes its first incredible turn. Harald didn't arrive as a beggar seeking shelter. Even in exile, the young prince possessed something that would prove more valuable than gold: ruthless ambition and an uncanny talent for warfare. From refugee to warlord. In Kiev, Harald found refuge with Grand Prince Yaroslav the Wise, who recognized potential when he saw it. For several years, the young Viking honed his skills, leading military expeditions and building a reputation as a warrior who combined Norse berserker fury with tactical brilliance. But Kiev was merely a stepping stone. Harald's eyes were fixed on a prize that glittered far to the south: Constantinople, the greatest city in the Christian world. Around 1034, Harald made a decision that seems almost insane by modern standards. He gathered a band of warriors and traveled over 1,000 miles to offer his services to the Byzantine emperor. Keep in mind, this wasn't like sending a resume today. This was a Viking warlord essentially cold-calling the most sophisticated empire on earth, hoping they'd hire him and his battle-hardened crew. The Byzantines said yes, and this is where Harald's story transforms from remarkable to utterly unprecedented. Haraldr entered the Varangian Guard. Harald joined the Varangian Guard, an elite unit of Scandinavian and Rus warriors who served as the emperor's personal bodyguards and shock troops. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the Navy SEALs of the medieval world, chosen for their size, strength, and fearlessness. And Harald didn't just join them. Within a few years, he was commanding them. But here's what makes this period so fascinating. Harald wasn't content to simply guard palace doors and look intimidating. He turned the Varangian Guard into his personal war machine and profit venture, leading them on campaigns across the Byzantine frontier that read like an action movie script. Between 1034 and 1043, Harald fought in places that would make your head spin. He battled Arab pirates in the Mediterranean. He led amphibious assaults on Sicily. He crushed rebellions in Bulgaria. He even campaigned in the Holy Land, potentially visiting Jerusalem itself. A Viking warrior walking the streets where Christ had walked, now as a Byzantine general with an army at his back. The treasure hunter general. Here's where the story takes a deliciously controversial turn. The Byzantine sources and the Norse sagas disagree wildly about Harald's character during this period, and the truth probably lies somewhere scandalously in the middle. According to the sagas, Harald employed a stratagem so clever and ruthless that it deserves its own Netflix series. When besieging well-fortified towns in Sicily, he allegedly used psychological warfare that would make Machiavelli proud. In one account, he pretended to be dying and requested a Christian burial inside the town walls. When the gates opened for his funeral, his men threw off the coffin lid and Harald leapt out, sword in hand, leading a surprise assault that captured the city. Did this actually happen? Historians debated. But what's undeniable is that Harald accumulated staggering wealth during his Byzantine service. wealth that would later help him buy his way back into Norwegian politics. Some of this treasure was legitimate payment for military service, but the Byzantines themselves accused Harald of keeping more than his fair share of plunder, leading to a dramatic falling out with the imperial court. The scandal that changed everything. By 1042, Harald's relationship with Constantinople had soured dramatically. The exact details are murky. History always gets foggy when powerful men quarrel, but it appears Harald had three major problems. First, he'd accumulated so much wealth that he'd become a potential threat to the throne. Second, he allegedly sought to marry a Byzantine princess, which the imperial family found presumptuous for a foreign mercenary. Third, and most damningly, the new emperor accused him of embezzling massive amounts of imperial treasure. Harald's response was characteristically bold. He essentially kidnapped his way out of the city. According to saga accounts, he broke out of custody, seized 2 imperial ships, and escaped through the Bosphorus, possibly even blinding one of the emperor's relatives in the process. Whether all these details are accurate matters less than the fact that by 1043, Harald was sailing back north with enough gold to finance his own kingdom. The return of the king. Harald's journey came full circle when he used his Byzantine fortune to reclaim power in Norway. By 1046, he'd fought his way to becoming co-ruler, and by 1047, sole king. The boy who fled the battlefield at 15 had returned as Hardrada, the hard ruler, one of the wealthiest and most experienced military commanders in Europe. But here's the final twist that makes Harald's story truly unforgettable. Despite everything he'd accomplished, despite commanding Byzantine armies and conquering cities across 3 continents, Harald died the way he'd begun, on a battlefield fighting for control of a kingdom. In 1066, at Stamford Bridge in England, the great warrior's incredible journey ended with an arrow to the throat, just days before William the Conqueror would change English history forever at Hastings. Why this story matters. Harald Hardrada's journey from wounded teenage refugee to Byzantine general to Norse king represents something profound about the medieval world that we often forget. It was more connected, more cosmopolitan, and more fluid than we imagine. A Viking could command Greek troops. A Norwegian prince could become a Mediterranean war hero. The world was vast and dangerous, but for men bold enough to seize opportunity, it offered possibilities that defy our neat modern categories. Harald's life reminds us that history isn't just about dates and dynasties. It's about individuals who refuse to accept the limitations fate seemed to impose on them. In 30 years, he transformed himself from a defeated boy into a legend, leaving behind a trail of gold, blood, and stories that still captivate us nearly 1,000 years later. That's the power of a life truly lived, and truly extraordinary.